Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Campfire.
Well, thank you, Mike, for having me. I appreciate being here.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to this one with so much experience in the publishing world. I'm sure that you could help us add a lot of ideas to not only discovering our voice, but living the hero journey. Because I've really figured out that life is a lot like writing a book. We live from one moment to the next and kind of just put some words on a page and we end up where we end up.
That's a great metaphor. And sometimes we get to the end of chapters when we didn't really want to, but we always turn the page and get to the next chapter, don't we?
We do, I think that's one of the hardest things that we struggle with, and it's what really mutes our creative voice is when those chapters end unexpectedly,
Mhm.
or they don't turn out the way that we anticipated that they would.
That's true. I don't know anybody who has a life that they could plan completely and work the plan without any interruptions or detours along the way.
It as you start to embrace it though, it's what makes it fun.
Yeah, yeah, and well, it's how we grow also, because if we made a plan and we just step by step through the plan, you could argue what would be the point of living life? There would be no point.
I think not only would there not be a point, but there wouldn't be any authors in this world.
Yes, yes, that's true. And we're fortunate. We get to work with people in all walks of life. Some of the authors we work with have very sad stories, but there are a lot of times they're stories of resilience and coming back from unimaginable tragedies and terrors. But they carry on and they put their thoughts in a book so that they can share what happened to them with other people in an attempt to help others get through what they just went through.
That's the cool thing about the human experience, and it's the reason that I record these around a campfire like this, is because it gives you an opportunity to let your shoulders down and share some of those more vulnerable stories. And
Mhm.
storytelling is where we draw the inspiration to carry on our own journey and make those transitions.
Yeah, I think everybody on some level gets tired of the game that we're expected to play, and you do have to let your hair down sometimes and just be real and just be the person you are and not worry about whether anybody likes you. Just do your thing, and if it resonates with someone, great. If it doesn't, that's okay too.
I'm sure that you come across a lot of that though within your work as far as somebody coming to you with an idea, but they're very insecure and they haven't quite found their voice. So I'm sure it takes a lot of talking, a lot of brainstorming in order to help them not only feel comfortable with the message you're trying to share, but also develop that voice.
Yeah, well, we are not actually writing coaches. I mean, we can edit a manuscript once it's been completed, but we really can't help people write a book, but we can help them maybe if they have written the book, maybe help them recognize where it's going off track or the voice sounds confusing or they're not making the point they intended to make in the strongest possible way. So that's where we come into the process.
And I want to go back to the beginning of that process and I want to talk about or have you talk me through the process that brought you into actually traveling down this road.
Well, that's an interesting story. I never intended to work in publishing. I got out of school and had every intention of working in the advertising, graphic design, and advertising industry. And there we go, right away. My very first chapter wasn't the one I expected. But I was living and working in New York at the time, where I grew up. And my one of my early interviews was at Crown Publishing in New York City, and they were the first people to offer me a job, so I took it, and that's how I wound up in the publishing field.
I love the simplicity of that, but yet it's so complicated because that's essentially how I found myself where I'm at now. I went from just kind of living a mundane life and doing my thing to having some experiences in life that pushed me down the path to becoming a wilderness meditation guide. author, podcaster, all these crazy things that I never envisioned. But I'm sure you can relate to the fact that once you stumble into your purpose, it's very fulfilling.
Yeah, I loved publishing from my very first experience there at Crown Publishing because every job was different, every book we worked on was different, and I realized then that this was not going to be a boring job where I did the same thing day in and day out, that there was going to be new things to learn and to discover all the time. So I was hooked from the very beginning.
Getting hooked is really just embracing the idea of facing new challenges and trying to discover who you are.
Yeah, I mean, and we see that journey of the authors who work with us. It's sometimes a painful journey, but always worthwhile. And at the end of the process, they're so glad to have a book in their hands and to see what they've been working on, perhaps in an unsure way, working on it, and all of a sudden they're holding a printed book in their hands, and wow, it's real now. Now I've done it. I've got something I can share with the world, and hopefully the world will embrace it.
I like the idea of learning to embrace both the pain of the journey as well as the joys and the satisfactions of it because they're both equal. You know, you
Mhm.
can't have one without the other because you wouldn't appreciate those victories without the struggles that come with it.
That's right. That's for sure. It teaches us to appreciate the good times and to realize that the bad times aren't necessarily going to last, and we just have to trudge through them as best we can.
Yeah, and trudging through it is probably where you become a real strength or a real shoulder to lean on for an author who's found their voice and started to really hone on it and really tie into it really well.
Yeah, and I think now that I'm older, it's kind of funny. It takes you a whole lifetime to get what seems to be a good place in life. I wish I had the energy of youth and the knowledge I have now. Yeah.
I can relate to that. I look at my children and I see, that energy, how it just kind of bounces every which way as they try and experiment with life. And if I could tap into that with the wisdom that I have now, I feel like life would be so much easier and so much more direct. But that journey, it's like the stumbling and that's how you learn that wisdom.
Yeah, yeah, it's an adventure. It's wonderful. We're blessed.
I gotta ask you though, because I know you've done a lot of work with a lot of people in discovering probably their voice as well as who they are. What are some of the most interesting experiences that you've been a part of?
Oh gosh, every author that comes to us is unique, right? So that's it's kind of a hard question to answer, but I'm always impressed by the people who um, get through things that that would probably destroy me, right? And they're still standing, and they still have something good to say, and they still have the desire to share what they learned with other people, and we get to work with people who are uh, honestly a lot smarter than we are in their own field. You know, we're smart in our field, but they're smart in theirs, and it's always great to talk to people who have a different perspective about things, and to see just how hard people work. We just finished last year a book about Churchill, Winston Churchill. It was over 800 pages and it had 4,000 footnotes. I mean, I can't imagine sitting down and accomplishing anything even close to that. And yet this author did it. It's people are just impressive.
If we give ourselves the space to give them credit for it, that's where people are in front. When we look at things through that mindset of maybe I'm jealous of what you can do, or I'm a victim because you have this or you have that. And it takes a process to get through, to get to that point. Talk to me a little bit about, you may not have been jealous of what people have accomplished, but I'm sure at some point it's kind of held a little bit of a brass spring that you struggled to get to. So talk to me about kind of overcoming that a little bit.
Oh gosh, I've had my own roller coaster ride in terms of career things. I like I said, I grew up and worked in New York for a while, and then my husband and I moved to Phoenix, Arizona, because we thought that would be an adventure and something new and different. And I just assumed I was as a kid in my 20s, just assumed that I'd be able to find a job in Phoenix the way I had in New York. And that didn't turn out to be the case. I came to Phoenix and found out that I couldn't make more than minimum wage with the skills I had. So that became my prompt to open a business, which I knew nothing at all about being in business, just did it on a lark, just like moving to Phoenix. And it worked out okay. I just learned as I went along, learned from people as I went along. And one memory that sticks in my brain is an early customer that walked into my office. I must have looked naive and very green. And he said to me, listen to your customers, they'll tell you everything you need to know. And and it was the best business advice I've ever received up until that point, and even since that point, in all the information I've come across, that has turned out to be the best advice I ever received.
I like that a lot. That is a very powerful piece of advice to open your ears. You
I'm sorry.
know, to open your ears. Epictetus wrote a lot about that concept. We have two ears and one mouth for a reason. We could listen a lot more than we talk.
Mhm.
And that's where sometimes the challenge comes up because as we go through life, somebody may say something that hits us the wrong way. We want to respond before we think about it. And when you take that kind of advice, just simply listen. It makes the situation so much easier.
Mhm.
It's like it lifts that burden of response off of your shoulders. You're taking somebody's advice and you're giving yourself permission to listen in order to grow.
Yeah, and sometimes it's hard to listen, right? When it's hardest to listen, that's when we're learning the most. Sometimes we don't want to hear what other people have to say.
No, absolutely. And I think, as we talk through this, it kind of intrigues my thoughts a little bit about the mindful aspect of being in an arena where you're essentially helping people. How that has helped you to develop your own personal practices that allow you to be present and involved and engaged with each individual person that comes to you.
Yeah, and the reason I started becoming a guest on podcasts is because the self-publishing industry has become very confused and not to the advantage of authors in many cases. And so, I'm an introvert, like many of my authors. The last thing I want to do is public speaking. But I just felt so strongly about what was going on that I wanted to speak about it and let people know that there's an alternative to the things they would most likely find online if they were looking for information about publishing a book.
That's where it gets back to that quest for knowledge,
Mhm.
and willing to pivot along your journey. Because yeah, you come up with the goal and you write the manuscript, and in your head, you see the idea that self-publishing is the only avenue. You may not be very well informed about how to get there, but being able to acknowledge my strength is in the writing, my weakness is within getting it out and helping it. Maybe it's okay for me to reach out to somebody and have these kind of conversations and allow them to help me build that road path.
Yeah, well, I think it's not just in publishing, there's just a lot of um, outright deception in the business world today on a lot of levels and from a lot of companies. And so um, my little bit here is to just try to offer just a little bit of a light to let authors know that there's an alternative.
There's always a light at the end of the tunnel, and there's always an alternative if we're willing to step outside the box, though.
Yeah. Yeah, it's well, always, right? In everything in life, you have to be able to step out of your comfort zone and think about other ways to do things. Otherwise, you stop growing.
You do. You get caught up in that just sense of, I see the prize, I see the goal. The goal is what defines me. But then when you have conversations with yourself or other experts in the field that you're pursuing, you realize that the goal is just simply the suit that you're wearing at the time. You know,
Mhm.
you're allowed to take that off. You're allowed to change direction, put on a different color or whatever the case may be, because it opens up the idea that the journey is unique.
Yeah, well, we all have our comfort zones, right? And and it's a nice place to be because you don't have to think too much if you stay in your comfort zone.
Which again gets back to the mindful aspect of it.
Yeah,
When you think about just the robotic movements and the lack of having to think your way through things, yeah, it's easy. However, it's not always the most fulfilling. It's when
right.
you step into the unknown and you start to grow because it forces you to have conversations. It forces you to reach out and network and explore new options,
Hmm. Yep.
which again, comes back to the idea that talking and building those connections, you got to train yourself though to learn that
Hmm.
they're okay because
Yeah,
we're all built with that hardwire inside that these new connections we try to build can always be scary and we got to be skeptical, but we got to put them up for like an unbiased effort.
yeah. Well, we all have our defenses, right? It's like, you don't confuse me with the facts. I'm comfortable where I am. So we all have to fight that.
And I want to dive into the structure and the things that your company has to offer though as well. I want to do this in a roundabout way that we can kind of help somebody realize that finding your voice and working toward it is just as important as writing a book in order to help somebody else.
Yeah. Well, like I said before, self-publishing has become very confusing and sometimes people are winding up with the wrong information because the companies that are dispensing the wrong information know how to dominate the search engines and they are found first compared to smaller companies like mine that are actually giving authors what they need to know instead of what they want to hear. So it's a challenge sometimes, but I would just say that authors should, if I had to just say one thing to authors, I would say if you think you need a publisher, that's not correct. You do not need a publisher anymore. That was the original idea of self-publishing, was that you, the author, would be the publisher and that you didn't need anybody else to help you, quote unquote, publish your book. But now in the last 20 years, companies called self-publishing companies, hybrid publishers, and just publishers have come on the scene to insert themselves in between the author and all of the revenue they should be making when they publish a book. If you publish the book in your own name, and that's what we help our authors do, you'll keep control of it, you'll make more money, and you will never lose access to your files or anything else about your book like you would if you work with a so-called publisher. So that's it. Once you know that, then you can find the right company for you and and take it from there.
It's funny because a lot of my background previously, I did a lot of work in music. So I was active in music when the transition from you had to have a record label to all of a sudden you could do all this stuff on your own happened when the revolution came about, I guess. And I remember how not only confusing that was in the beginning, but also how much of a battle it was. I'm curious within, the author and the publishing industry, if it was the same sort of thing.
Yeah, well, it's not, and that's can be the perception for publishing as well. Authors may think, gosh, I don't have a clue how to go about and hire all the experts I need to publish my book, so I'd better just sign up with a publisher. But the alternative I've been talking about is that you don't have to sign up with a publisher. You can sign up with a company like mine, and there are many, called author services companies. And what we do for authors is help them with all of the tasks they need, all of the people they need to produce that book without taking control of that book and without sharing their revenue. So authors should look for that, an author services company versus a publisher.
And that's where in the music industry we've all gone to, is we've gotten away from the labels. We've learned how to do this stuff ourselves, and it took help. It took pioneers to lay out a roadmap. And for a lot of us, that was kind of scary. But as we started to adjust and we embraced it, it became not only okay and comfortable, but it became beneficial. And this is where I really appreciate your work and the effort behind what it is that you're doing. Is you're taking an art that is so essential in storytelling, and you're removing all of the unknowns by helping build that roadmap. You're helping somebody to actually guide and direct their direction after they've taken the time to find their own voice.
That's correct. And I was going to use the word guide when you beat me to it, because if you're heading out on any kind of a journey, right, it helps to have a guide who's been down that road before and can help you avoid the pitfalls and the dangerous things that you might run into on your own. Not because you're not a smart person, but because you've never done this particular thing before. So why would you know all of the things that can happen that are negative? That's why you need somebody who's experienced to help you along the way.
The guide and the mentor are so essential to every journey, regardless of what it is, whether it's a publishing journey or it's a healing journey, or it's just moving ahead in life.
Mhm.
Going to somebody that has been there and has the reference point, it doesn't make you less of a person. It doesn't weaken the momentum or even the story of your journey. It actually adds to it.
Exactly. And that's actually the difference between a guide and a publisher in the publishing world would be that a publisher is going to not just guide you, but take control of your book and and make it their book. Whereas an author services company like mine is going to help you create the book that you want to create. Not that we won't give you advice along the way if we think you're heading in the wrong direction or about to dive off a cliff, but we're working for you. If you sign up with a publisher, you're working for the publisher. So that's really a big difference there.
That's where, being mindful of the control and the direction that you really want is so important. You got to ask yourself those hard conversations before you really commit to anything in life,
Mhm.
because more times than not, it is just in somebody else's dream, and they're going to make you take the back seat because this is their vision, as opposed to if you take the time to explore it on your own hand and look for somebody that has a more authentic version of delivering their services to help guide you. You're going to get more out of that. You're going to have a bigger voice and a bigger role within the outcome.
Oh, absolutely. We probably exchange 200 or more messages with the authors before the project is done. So, and that's another difference too of working with a small company, because a small company isn't going to put you on an assembly line where the same solution is offered to you and you get call center customer service and, automated responses. A small company is going to be a more personal experience for you. You don't have to be shy about asking what may seem like a dumb question, because we're we're just people just like you are, and we're happy to help. That's what makes us enjoy our workday too.
You bring up an interesting point because within our world, we look at like the big box cookie cutter solutions because they're convenient, they're easy. But then we get to the point along the journey where we look back and we go, that was so unfulfilling. That was such a waste of my time and effort. Now what do I do?
Mhm.
And when you're sitting there and you're looking for a direction before you even go down any path, taking the time to evaluate, what it is that's going to give you that control, that's going to give you that voice is so important. And understanding it's okay if it's outside the box or if it's reaching out to a mentor, a smaller chain that's going to give you more say. And what we keep coming back to is the idea that, along a hero journey, an author journey, or any other journey, it's always got to be within your hands. There is no simple cookie cutter answer to that problem, but it entails more work. You got to be willing to do the work to get there.
And I think it's inevitable that the larger a company gets, the more they have to systematize what they do. There's no other way, think of your cell phone company. There's no other way to handle millions of customers except to create a whole bunch of little boxes and put each customer in one box or another. And that's not true with a small company. We can be more person to person about the whole process.
So as we start to come toward the end of our time, I want you to go backwards a little bit and speak to the person that, regardless of what kind of journey they're on, they're struggling to find their voice and offer them some advice on how to bring that voice forward.
Well, it's pretty much what I've already said, is that I think you would, if you're struggling and you want real person to person advice from someone who has been in the industry, a team of people who have been in the industry and love giving advice, you'd be better off working with a smaller company, not a great big company that's pulling in thousands of authors every month, because you just can't get personal service from a company that is set up that way. And for them, they don't. I have to say, they don't really care about giving advice. They care about getting um, more jobs. It's all about numbers for them. Get you into the pipeline, move you through as quickly as possible. And if the book that comes out the other end isn't perfect, so be it. We're going for the next customer. Um, we don't operate that way. We are individuals helping individual authors to get where they want to go. And at the end of the process, make sure they earn as much money as they possibly can selling their book, because nobody else is participating in their profits. We don't take a penny of an author's profits, right? So if authors see the word royalty, or if they see the word free ISBN, or they see promises from another company to get your book into bookstores worldwide, those are three red flags that should immediately let them know they're not dealing with an author services company like ours.
And as we come toward the end of this, you got to let people know how they can work with you, what you got coming up, all those good things.
Sure. My company is 1106design.com. And if you go there, I will give you a free copy of my little book called Publish Like the Pros. And it outlines our process and the things that most authors, when they're writing a book for the first time, need to know about how to publish in the most advantageous way for them.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's been a pleasure to get to meet you and have this conversation.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate being here.
anytime. I don't believe in goodbye, so until we meet again, whether it's this life or the next, I hope you a safe and prosperous journey.
Thank you so much.